Welcome to KBcast, the podcast for security executives, interviewing people from around the globe on how organizations can operate smarter and stay safer. Here's Carissa Breen.
I caught up with Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith, who is the Australian Government's Women in STEM Ambassador, as well as a Professor of Practice at the University of New South Wales. In her role as Women in STEM Ambassador, Lisa is responsible for increasing the participation of women and girls in science, technology, engineering, and maths. I wanted to deep dive into her thoughts on how we as an industry can increase the recruitment of women into the field, as well as inspire a younger generation of schoolgirls. Lisa adds a lot of food for thought for leaders to consider when hiring, as well as managers who are looking for ways to incentivize and retain their female talent. Lisa, welcome. I really appreciate you coming on my podcast today, and I'm interested to hear more about your thoughts, because a lot of the conversation that we are going to dive into today, I think, in my experience, a lot of people ask me a lot in the industry, and I sort of give my opinion, but because you're doing this day in, day out in regards to STEM, I'm really interested and keen on hearing your thoughts and understanding how executives can go about implementing perhaps some of the wisdom that you'll give today. But before we dive into that, I'd love to start off by talking about you and your journey. So can you please walk our listeners through your career, like where you started and what you're doing now?
Sure thing. Yeah. It's great to talk about these subjects, and it's maybe a little strange where I come from, because I started off as an astrophysicist, and I've had 15 years industry experience, written 49 peer-reviewed papers in astrophysics journals about black holes and the birth and death of stars in our galaxy and all sorts of things. But I really just started falling in love with the night sky when I was a child. And when we think about kids and we think about their education and the opportunities they have, there's really simple stuff that we can do to give kids real life learning experiences, actually looking at the stars with them, actually delving into questions and talking to kids. And that really helped me to find a passion for astronomy. So that's sort of where I've come from. In terms of career, I did a master's degree in astronomy and astrophysics, a PhD in astrophysics, and was really focused on radio telescopes and how they can help us to understand the universe. So I started off researching the birth of stars, went into major international research organizations, and started getting involved in actually developing new telescopes as well. So not just understanding how to use telescopes, but actually developing new ones, more powerful ones. And of course, the computing infrastructure behind that, which is really fascinating. In fact, the last project I worked on in Australia, the Australian SKA Pathfinder, which is a precursor to the Square Kilometre Array, this giant international global project to build the world's most powerful radio telescope, requires on-site massive computing power. It's streaming 72 terabits per second of data in a very remote area of Australia, and streaming part of those data down to the Pawsey Supercomputing Centre in Perth, and distributing data like that across the country and across the world is one of our big challenges. So really, beyond astronomy, I've learned a lot about engineering and also distributed data as well. So lots of fun challenges in my career. But now I've moved on to a new challenge, which is trying to increase the participation of women and girls in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math subjects, which of course are some of the fastest growing skill sets required by all industries, even from the arts to music and technology to infrastructure, advanced manufacturing. So many industries now require these skills that we're really looking at an opportunity to increase the participation of women and girls in particular through upskilling, reskilling, and improving the pathways for women. And it's a really exciting job and a lot to get my teeth into.
I've been doing a lot of research lately in a book that I read recently. It's just that a lot of students in general are not even taking advanced mathematics as one of the insights. But then I guess the other side of that is a lot of women are not doing any of these types of subjects at a high level. Like, what do you think is the reasoning for that? And I think that could be because you've got jobs out there like influencers. So I feel that maybe women are exposing themselves to these girls that are on social media. They look gorgeous, and then they're getting paid a whole bunch of money to do that. And then as a result of that, like, STEM perhaps isn't as attractive or sexy. So what do you sort of think of from that point of view? Yeah,
there are so many cultural influences on the uptake of STEM education. In fact, when you look at the data from reports like the Women in STEM Decadal Plan, a 10-year plan that we created a couple of years ago to try and increase women's participation, you can see that in Australia and other similar countries, industrialized countries, English-speaking countries, the number of women doing engineering and IT is absolutely tiny. It's minuscule, less than 10% in many ways of counting. Now, if you look at engineering in China and India, the majority of engineers are women in those countries. So that just highlights the extremely cultural influence on what subjects girls and boys choose in schools, and the things you alluded to, the sort of role modeling that we require is another important part of this. But really, there are lots of other subtle effects as well in society. There's a study, a US study of parents and how they talked to 2-year-olds, their children, when they were 2 years old, and parents were talking about counting and numbers 3 times more frequently with their boys than they were with their girls aged 2 years old. So even at that very young age, the way we speak to children, the subjects that we encourage them to take an interest in, and the sorts of conversations we're having are very different. So all of these things are having contribute to the really big differences we see then from year 6 onwards in children's interest.
So just going back to the example around the parents and their 2-year-old, do you think that's just because it's engendered into the adults in terms of it's not like they're actively thinking, oh, I'm going to get my son to count more versus my daughter? I think it's just perhaps maybe how they grew up, so they don't see any difference perhaps. So I guess it goes back to that cultural thing you were just talking about before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's cultural, it's habitual. When kids go to the shops, the boys have clothes to choose from with dinosaurs on the front and spaceships, and the girls have rockets, not rockets. The girls have, unicorns and princesses, and all of that we're seeing again and again. We see it every day. We see it on TV. We see it in the national curriculum in schools. Everything that we're being taught is that there are boys subjects and girls subjects, and everything we see about adults is sort of reinforcing that. So it's very pervasive. It takes time, and it takes a little bit of circumspect thought about how we can remove these barriers in schools, in homes, in society, in the media, and in popular culture, and of course within industry too.
No, that's really interesting, because I recently read that Australia needs 6.5 million more digital workers by 2025. And I guess that was a report commissioned by AWS. And I guess they alluded to it was 79% on top of today's workers. So that's quite a large number. And so I'm curious from your point of view with the work that you do, like, what's the plan for this? And how are we as a nation going to address these concerns in order to fuel this demand? Because a lot of the conferences that I go to, it's like, how do we get more people in security, but then how do we get more women in security? And I think people give answers, but then I feel like people do a lot of talking and a lot of walking, and I'm a person of action. So I'd really love to hear your thoughts on people that are listening to this. Like, what can they actually do to get the outcome that they keep talking about?
Yeah, well, it's a many-layered problem, of course, because, people are in the workforce for 40 or 50 years on average. And, of course, if we start now with just schools, without upskilling and reskilling people who are already in the workforce, it will take a very long time for the change to happen. And by then, there may be different skills that people need. So it's really, you've got to focus on adults as well as kids. There is a national curriculum review currently going on, and that is a real opportunity. I believe they're taking expressions of interest for people to actually suggest elements of the curriculum very soon. So we've really got to make sure digital skills are embedded in every subject in schools as part of like business as usual, not just as a sort of a separate entity, but that digital skills are being incorporated into all subjects, from sports and science to arts, and that young people are seeing that digital skills are absolutely an integral part of so many industries nowadays. Hopefully through COVID, apart from, all the terrible disruption there has been and all the terrible health impacts, hopefully remote work can become more of a norm now. So it hopefully will then enable Australia's workforce to be a little bit more mobile. Actually, matching skills to geography and jobs is a real challenge in Australia. There's a lot of people with qualifications who aren't living in the right places. So really removing that barrier is going to be quite important. I think unis are post-COVID offering a lot more micro-credentials. You're seeing pop-up ads. I don't know if you are on my socials. I'm getting ads for, do a short course on, digital security or cyber or something else. And really the problem and the worry that I have is like yours. Is this practical? Will someone come out of this course and actually be able to get a job? Will they be ready for a job? Are there partnerships? So I spoke a lot to the government last year as I was asked to advise them on post-COVID recovery and in terms of getting more women into STEM jobs, around upskilling and reskilling mature-aged women who have had a career or may have had a career break after having children or for other reasons, and then want to return to the workforce, and thinking about those partnerships. So not just education, but then putting them into an actual job and matching businesses to those job seekers with training incorporated. So there are lots of new measures through the last federal budget, like the Digital Skills Finder platform, which helps Australian workers and job seekers and small businesses reskill through the recovery period. And also there are lots of other measures like the Careers Transition Assistance, $41 million of funding for mature age job seekers to increase digital literacy. We're also looking at other programs such as the Women in STEM and Entrepreneurship grants, giving money to programs, that are matching women with digital skills and trying to increase those. So a lot of programs. What my team is trying to do is measure the impact of those programs. And that's a big part of what I'm trying to do, impact measurement. Is this working? And then we can review after a year whether these types of measures are making a difference. So that's my sort of approach, is very much data driven, and hoping that we can really shift the dial.
Yeah, that's really interesting. In terms of the government, how are they sort of disseminating communications to organizations? Now, I ask this because, for example, I get a lot of people in the industry that are trying to upskill. So they're trying to redeploy into cyber. But then you have either recruitment consultants or talent acquisitions within businesses saying you need like 15 years of experience and all this and all that. And those people don't exist. But then the other side of it is students that have actually got a master's in cybersecurity that can't get a job. So there's a massive surplus of students that can't get the work. As a result of not getting a job, they go and study something else. We're actually losing talent, because I feel like there needs to be an education piece around the recruitment side of it. And maybe that needs to be driven from the government. But I was hired into security for talent and capability, not for credentials. And that's something now I'm going back through to get all those credentials. I was probably an anomaly, but for most other people that I speak to, it's frustrating for them. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how is government trying to educate organisations that they need to see past perhaps someone that doesn't have 10 years of experience in the field, but they're equally as good or if not better than the people that we've currently got.
Yeah, I completely hear what you're saying in terms of trying to recruit for potential talent, as you say. That I think really that's on industries to do that. And in terms of the partnerships that government's trying to facilitate, I don't know the details of how the various departments. I guess they'll disseminate that information differently through their networks, but and through Oz Industry. But in terms of big industries, hopefully there will be programs coming out of this budget cycle whereby people can upskill and actually go into work in these companies. How you link to small businesses, I think that's probably more challenging. But I certainly can't speak for the government there. But it is a really important point because understanding the plethora of programs, I'm sure, is a bit of a rat's nest for especially small businesses. And understanding what's available is very important too. Let's hope we can keep trying to get it right.
So let's go back to the buyer side of things. So I've been working in this space for a while, and when I talk to people, whether it's in an Uber and they ask me like, hey, what do you do for a job? And I tell them cyber. And the reaction is that they were surprised. Like I think one Uber driver thought like I look like a musician or something like that. Like I don't fit the mold. And I think the mold that perhaps someone on the street, but when they think about cyber, is usually, a dude in a hoodie in a basement, and that's not not really the case, right? But
that's it.
And I guess it's interesting because I guess part of my belief is that it acts sort of as a deterrent to attracting women in the field, because if they're watching shows like Sex in the City, they're in PR, they're in marketing, like they're doing these like sexier fields. But then when you think of cyber, women, I don't think in terms of to the masses, this is a field that they think about, because it's probably how Hollywood positions it, as in I have to wear hoodies and I perhaps not a very social person. Now, I know a lot of people in the space that do not dress like that are heavily social, and I'm just curious of how do we remove that now, because we've really painted ourselves this picture and we backed ourselves into a corner a little bit, and now we're trying to move and it's becoming more difficult every day.
I completely agree. I mean, we're trying to prise the media open with a crowbar at the moment in terms of working with them to encourage, for example, the ABC has had a drive in the last couple of years to include far more diverse figures in their news and reporting. We have things like databases for women in STEM, the STEM Women database, which is a huge repository of hundreds. I think they might have hit 1,000 even of women who work in the field across the country, to try and provide, I guess, a pool of experts for the media to work with. Getting into, how the media actually recruit, it's very much still a superstar driven and stereotype driven industry. But trying to work closely with media organizations to get those new faces out, that can be done on an individual and collective level, and certainly groups I'm involved with are trying to do that. It's different though from getting more women as commentators in the media and talking about these jobs and why they're important, to actually getting the Scully effect going. The Mulder and Scully were in the X-Files, and Dana Scully was a female character who worked in forensics, and there was a huge explosion of women studying forensics after that show was aired. So it's a real effect. If there's a female role model in one of these areas, and a positive one at that, we're not talking Big Bang Theory or the IT Crowd or one of these sort of jokey, stereotypy kind of shows, it makes a huge difference. And, research shows that. So it's about storytelling. It's about really making an effort as an industry to get into the media and to tell our stories, and actually to, make a concerted effort, commission a documentary, or commission a show, pitch shows, do what you're doing, podcasts, but outside of the industry as well. I mean, I got sick of this. I got sick and tired of just seeing shelves and shelves of astronomy books written by men. So I wrote books, and now I write books every year, and I've written kids' books, and I'm plotting a new careers book for kids in 2022. So we need to do the legwork and getting women's voices out there, and working with people in the industry to actually get these stories out, because the stereotypes, they're very old, they're very worn, and they're not helpful. They even put boys off, actually, because that real stereotype that people in IT are socially awkward, they work alone, that puts off a lot of great people from the field. And it's really narrowing the possibilities of what we can achieve as an industry.
So what I'm hearing from what you're saying is, I agree. It's definitely doing a disservice in terms of how we're pitching it to people, especially younger people that are absorbing the content. But I guess you're sort of saying that we have to sort of work closer with media organizations. Are they sort of open to people within cyber, like knocking on their door and saying like, hey, I believe as an organization or as an individual, I can help you represent the industry in a better way, or help demystify a lot of the theories that are in this space? Are they sort of very open to that?
Yeah, I think people don't realize how open the media industry is to pitches. I mean, that's how it works. But, we don't learn that if we're not in the media industry. So you can actually just go along with an idea and say, hey, ABC, I'd like to do a regular tech piece, or I'd like to, write articles, or I'd like to do a podcast for your organization, and take that to bigger audiences. But, you've got to sort of make quite an effort to do that. It's a lot of expense and time, but if people do that, you've got to create those new role models for young people who pushing against these stereotypes. And certainly we're doing that with some of our campaigns, which I think we'll talk about later. But showing kids that there is a huge diversity of people out there doing great jobs and trying to change the world in good and useful ways is the story they want to hear.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm just even thinking back to when I was in high school. Like IT was kind of a thing, but I thought of IT back then as the guy that would come around and as more of a help desk, like level 1, level 2 sort of engineer, like coming around and like helping you at your school computer, so to speak. Like that was my understanding back then of IT, and that's fundamentally different. And I think because of people who are friends with me that are not inside the space, because I'm in it, I feel like I've actually opened up a bigger conversation that now they're like, hey, I know this KB chick, she's really into it, she loves it, she lives and breathes it. And because of that, it's actually made me question a lot of things about it. Whereas before, perhaps they didn't know someone that they could just ask these types of questions, and it's not readily available in terms of having the right people at the coalface really articulating a lot of the stuff that does go on in this space. So I think that I really love your thoughts on just going and being a little bit more aggressive towards these media guys, because I think that they probably are looking for people out there that are keen to talk about the industry, but not really sure where to look, right?
Like nobody knows what cyber is, really. Do you remember when Justin Trudeau stunned the world by knowing what a quantum computer was?
Yes.
It's the basic knowledge that we don't even expect other people to have. And why should you expect them to? Like, that didn't exist when they were at school. Even the concepts barely existed. So understanding the level people are at is the first rule of communication. And writing cybersecurity for babies, maybe that's your next move.
Interesting. Do you think people are ready to hear about cybersecurity?
Hell yeah, definitely. People are interested. People are interested because buzzwords, it was sort of annoy me when I don't know what a buzzword means. Yeah, you're like, oh, big data, okay, whatever. And what does that actually mean? How does it affect me? You demystify it and you bring it into people's focus, and you say, actually, this matters because when you don't get all your money stolen from the bank, that's a good thing, right? And people go, oh yeah, I get this now. You got to link it to their lives and
make it relatable, right? Because like no one cares. Like a company got hacked, so what? So I guess you've got to sort of relate it back to a consumer perspective. And I think one of the challenges that we have in this space is a lot of brilliant people that work in this industry, but really struggle on the comms side of it. Like, how do I relay a complex thing into layman terms, or into a way in which that the person I'm speaking to, and like the discourse in which you speak and communicate to that person. And I guess that's a big reason why I got into what I'm doing now, to become that conduit between the industry and the public, and getting people to understand like why it's important, because it is, and it's going to be here forever as long as technology is around. And I think that that's been the challenge for people to articulate things in a way that doesn't get convoluted, and you lose people because they get very detailed and very technical, and that loses like mainstream audiences.
That's it. I mean, it's taken me 20 years to know how to speak really calmly and confidently at the level of the public about astrophysics and what I do. And, now I can do that regularly on TV, and people get it because you remember what you didn't know when you didn't know it, and you speak to that person that you were. But it takes a lot of practice. And, when we're in a technical industry, I mean, jargon is just part of everyday life. You've got a million different technical terms and anagrams and acronyms, and people are just,
oh my gosh, yes.
Everything is so techie, even within, for example, in astrophysics, a radio astronomer like me would have jargon that an optical astronomer wouldn't understand. So how are we supposed to speak to the public when we can't even speak to each other?
No, you're absolutely right. And sometimes you'd have acronyms that meant the same acronym that would mean like multiple things, but you could get so good if you're in a meeting that you know exactly it's one of the seven, but you know which one that person's talking about.
From context.
What have been some of your strategies to sort of getting past? You said it takes a lot of practice and it's taken you 2 decades to sort of be able to speak to a wider audience. What are some of your strategies that you've employed in case of people listening out there that are like, yes, I am super technical, I need a better way of communicating to people? Do you have any sort of advice for the people listening?
I think it's just practice. A lot of it is practice. And it's really looking at watching it back maybe 10 times as well. The first few times it's horrible to hear your own voice, horrible to look at your own face. Everyone hates that. But you do it. You've got to watch it back, and you've got to say, if I was speaking, if I was sitting with an 8-year-old kid or a 12-year-old kid, would they understand that? And, the comprehension of most of the general public in terms of technical things is obviously at a level that, they haven't had the experience to study this at a higher level. So you've really got to dial it back like 10 notches beyond where you think you should be starting. And that's probably somewhere about right. You don't talk down to people because they're not stupid, and they do care, and they are capable of learning and very intelligent. But they don't know what you're talking about. They don't know where you're coming from, and they don't have your life experiences. So it's like talking about anything. You got to start from the beginning. Start from page 1. Explain where you are. Explain why they should care straight up, because you'll lose them within 10 seconds otherwise.
That's a really interesting point when you talk about don't talk down to people. It's something that I always say, like, don't patronize people. Like this person that you're speaking to has probably got a PhD in just another field. It doesn't mean that they're an idiot. It just means that they haven't studied it. So, of course, if you're an expert in a field, like, it's going to come across easy to you. And I think that's something that the industry's trying to remove, a little bit of that ego, a little bit of the arrogance of, well, I've been doing this for so long, like, why don't you understand it? And I think that a lot of that probably comes down to naivety, but also just understanding, like, emotional intelligence, how humans are wired, right? Like, patronizing someone and putting them down is not really going to influence them into learning more about a space that they don't know about.
That's it. The most, I guess the biggest driver as well is the why. Why are you telling me this? And what do you want me to go away and do? So you kind of have to have an ask. When I'm speaking to the media, what's the motivation for this? Firstly, the media to put me on a platform to speak, and what do I want the audience to go and do afterwards? If there's no kind of ask or no call to action, there's very little point in communicating something. Because if you don't want someone to change something, I think it's very difficult to motivate people to listen. So if you've got a little bit of an ask, a specific place to send them, go and learn this, have a look at this, or maybe try this. It's a nice way to sort of round off a discussion.
like to sort of talk to you a little bit more about another direction that I'm curious and love to hear your thoughts in, and it's the neurodiversity. So inside STEM that I believe are grossly underrepresented. And so how much of this do you believe is acultural? And I ask this because look at the work of Simon Baron-Cohen, and there's an argument that autism spectrum disorder may drive people just naturally towards STEM fields, and ASD is at about the same ratio in men, like 75-25 as women, and then STEM I think is like 25-75. So I'm really keen to explore your thoughts on this.
Yeah, first of all, I'll preface all of this with I'm not an expert in this area at all. I have had a look at the research, though, but it does remind me some of those arguments that you mentioned around Simon Baron-Cohen, the researcher into autism. It does remind me of some of the arguments, and these are just theories at present, that the arguments which I completely disagree with and have been discredited, that girls are just not interested in STEM. And we know that's not true because it's in other cultures, women dominate in engineering, and it just simply isn't true. So I do worry that there are a lot of competing effects here when we look, for example, at the fact, this is very gendered, that people who are autistic are far more likely to be diagnosed if they're men than if they're women, because the diagnostic tools have been designed around men's average presentation and symptoms of ASD. So that's just one example where I think there's a bit more complexity involved than simply there are more autistic men than women. Again, I'm not an expert, but I suspect there is a lot more work to be done, and that certainly comes out in the papers I read. There's also work by Xin Wei et al. In 2013 who found that, as you say, a large gender gap amongst autistic people studying STEM fields. So there's a few parts to this. If people are autistic, they're less likely to study post-secondary school. That's one fact. But if they do study, 39% of male students who are autistic choose STEM. So that's a very significant number versus 3% of autistic women. So there is that huge gender gap, again, which is larger than the gap in between men and women actually diagnosed with autism. So that's really, really interesting. However, I've only seen that one study. So I think there's a lot more work to do, again, to understand the complex interplay between differences in diagnosis or lacking in diagnosis of women with autism, and also some, probably many other different parameters around this. So I think the thing we can do practically, though, apart from do research, because that doesn't actually help, it helps us to understand, but it doesn't help individual students. We need to take a more intersectional approach when we talk about education and how education is set up. I was talking to a group of STEM teachers this morning and talking about the different ways that people respond to education, whether it's rote learning or collaborative learning, doing a project on your own, or just remembering things. And people who are just good at remembering things are going to pass tests and they're going to progress and they're going to be judged to be good at things. But when you actually get them in a real workplace and when you get them on real projects with an autonomous working environment where they're expected to lead, they're not necessarily going to be comfortable with that. So we need to consider an education system where we are assessing all these different skills and being quite explicit about that and helping to support and service people who need to improve in certain areas of those skills, because all of those skill sets are important in the workplace. But where people are accommodated, people can thrive and do really, really well where there may be barriers to their participation. Just one example of that is a story I read recently in the Guardian newspaper about a female electrician. She trained to be an electrician. That's a very considerable amount of training for 4 years. And she had very severe dyslexia. So she had problems with reading and writing, and she was given allowances in her examinations so that she could take a bit of time in a room on her own to actually read and comprehend the material. And that enabled her to pass. And now she's a professional. And if she hadn't had that accommodation for dyslexia, then she would not be an electrician. So, small accommodations can make a big difference where people have different needs. And I think we've got to really understand that people with different needs are a great asset to workplaces for many, many reasons. So hopefully we can move in that direction of being a little bit more flexible in everything we do.
Would you say that employers are being a little bit more open to being flexible and accommodating for people who perhaps a little bit different in how they approach things, so we're not sort of shutting people out, because there is a massive talent pool of people that are underutilized?
Yeah, absolutely depends on the culture of the organization and the leadership. That's down to senior leadership and how they communicate to their management structure underneath them, how they communicate and how you hire people, how you promote people and set KPIs. And it's whether that's a collaborative process or whether it's very much a one-way process from the top down. When you're collaborative, you learn that you actually can find out more about your staff and your team, what their needs are, what they're worried about. When you find out what they are thinking about and what their motivations are, you can get so much more out of people. And they're happier too. So hopefully people will start to realize that those leadership styles are actually going to get better results.
One of my girlfriends, she has a son. He's highly autistic, and I think that she's working with the psychologist to help him learn life skills and those types of things. But she was just saying that she's worried about like his employment in the future, and if there is a possibility of like getting a job, and what would that job and career look like. So do you think there could be like an education piece around helping parents that perhaps STEM is a great subject for people that are on the autistic spectrum, to be like, they can actually do really, really well in a career, because it does require a lot of focus and attention in terms of focusing on the details. So do you think that there is education around that, just to give parents that, I would say that at ease, that they know that their child does have a future in a particular career, and not to sort of just be written off too early on?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful not to fall in to any traps, because people on the autistic spectrum are very, very different, and everyone has a different presentation and different sort of skills and interests, and that is the same with anyone in the whole population. Right. So I think what we do need to do, though, is to definitely educate people in the workplace, in charge of education, that those needs are really able to be accommodated in workplaces and in the way we assess people's performance. If we can move to a better leadership style across the board, and take into account people's differences a little bit more, and maybe accommodate people's unique needs, whatever those are, then we can stop putting people in boxes. And I think, again, that's there may be some levels of truth around attention to detail with many people with autism, or other traits which perhaps are associated with autism. But I think that really ignores the fact that there is a spectrum, a huge spectrum of differences between people generally. And, if we accommodate all of those and don't put up barriers and sort of strict walls between people, that's going to help people across the board, and people with disabilities across the board too.
No, I love that. I really appreciate you shedding a little light on that, because I think that's a really important thing for people listening to remember. One of the things I'd like to sort of just explore and go back on a little bit is the cultural side of things. Now, I think we touched on this earlier in the interview. You mentioned India and Asia. So I'm really keen, from your experience, what are other countries doing in terms of their approach towards encouraging more women into STEM that we, as Australian citizens, can really learn to adopt ourselves in terms of our own organisations?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of great case studies from around the world. Firstly, in education, sort of early childhood and primary education, Scotland and the other parts of the UK too are doing great things, attempting to sort of squash gender stereotypes in schools. So they're doing a lot of work with a group of schools, and that's taking a lot of sort of commitment and extra work to bring teachers along on the journey. But they're trying to create inclusive classrooms and particularly inclusive play and learning experiences, and linking that to sort of gender agnostic careers advice to try to reduce the stereotypes around gender and jobs. So reducing that sort of participation gap and that expectation gap too. It's a lot of work, and it takes a considerable commitment over several years, but the results are quite interesting. And I can sort of see that, if that was a part of the country's education policy as a whole, you would make a tremendous difference, not just in participation in different subjects, but also in reducing violence against women and sexual harassment and bullying and that sort of thing. So I think that's a wonderful thing to do. Big commitment and a big ask for a nation to do, but luckily some people are taking that on. Austria has launched some interesting awareness-raising campaigns. I visited Europe just over a year and a half ago now, when we could all travel, and travelled around Europe actually learning from different countries and what they were doing for women in STEM. Austria had this great campaign around the roles of men and women in parenting at home. So it was sort of video campaigns, but it was a really interesting angle about getting more men to see themselves as parents and carers. Because if we don't change the fact that women do vastly more unpaid work at home, both housework and caring for both children and elders, we will never shift the dial. That's a huge part of the reason why male-female couples choose to have the woman staying at home looking after kids. So that, coupled with the lack of equal parental leave for men, we're not going to shift the dial if those things remain. So that's a nice way to sort of tackle those gender stereotypes. In terms of practical stuff, we've taken the lead in Australia from the UK, who have this program called the Athena Swan Charter. It's essentially a set of principles to create more equitable workplaces. So it's like an award scheme, really. You sign up your organisation. It works across the higher education and research sector, and you look and you audit at your own organisation. You look at your organisation and audit in terms of gender and position in the organisation. Things like how much people get paid, how senior their levels are, and do they experience a safe and comfortable workplace. And then you write an action plan for your own organisation, and you monitor, track data. And you try and improve. And that's a wonderful thing. That's actually spread to the US and Canada and to Australia now. We have this scheme working very hard, and it's spreading hopefully to New Zealand as well. So it's a really, really good way for organisations to simply audit themselves. Most organisations have to report to things like the Workplace Gender Equality Agency anyway, and organisations in Victoria now will have to do sort of gender reporting as the new, Equal Rights Act comes in this March. So there'll be a lot more reporting, but hopefully not just a reporting burden, but something useful that organisations can do to identify and then take steps to improve how they're going.
In terms of the campaign that you were just discussing in Austria, which I really, really liked, how far away do you think we are as Australians I'm shifting the dial. Are we close, or am I being too optimistic?
I think there's a few Australias. It depends who you talk to. It depends what circles you're in as to how much overt sexism you come across in everyday life. And a lot of people high up in organisations in particular are quite shielded from the attitudes that many others are coming across. So I think that's really one of the problems. And we've seen recently, reports from women and their experiences at school of being, sexually harassed or assaulted. It absolutely shocks adults because they're not there and they don't see this sort of behaviour. It's the same in the workforce where, women are seeing everyday sexism. They're experiencing being ignored or talked down to. I've experienced so many times. It doesn't happen to me because I'm very forward and make sure I put myself at the front. But a lot of women, when people are getting introduced in a room, they don't get their hands shook. It's just wow. You see little things a lot, and it's like, oh, that's probably just the secretary, and this happens so much. Just everyday sexism. Go and get us a cup of tea, love. That sort of attitude. So it's very, very good in some places where you don't notice these things, and then you start to notice. And then as you go through life and go through your career, you notice it more and more. And I think that there is work to do is the short answer to your question. And it's on all of us to create environments in workplaces whereby you can raise issues and you can raise them immediately. You raise them in the meeting. When someone says something, oh, that's just Dave, that's just what Dave does. We don't accept those things. The most senior person in the room should be saying, Dave, that's not on, in front of everyone immediately. That's how you stop it. It's very simple, and it just takes a little bit of guts and courage from leaders, and that's what we need to try and encourage.
Why wouldn't someone shake someone's hand, though? Like, I'm just perplexed by that. So I just don't understand that in terms of, like, not even like just removing gender, like why wouldn't you? I don't understand like why someone would. Do they think that person is not worthy of a handshake? Or
I think it's part of the hierarchy. So when you go to a new, a meeting with an organisation, you shake the hand of the CEO first, and then perhaps the more senior members, and you get down the line of responsibility. And sometimes at the bottom, there's just a bunch of people who just get ignored. And I've witnessed that so many times. It's, I think, very disrespectful generally. And so often it's the women who are sitting at the outside of the table, not on the board table, on the chairs behind it, or, essentially getting ignored and not even having their voices heard. That's not ideal. And that's not really the way to create collaborative conversations.
On the plus side, I know that there are a lot of men that ask me and that are really curious about getting more women into the field. So I'd love to ask you, Lisa, how would you advise or respond to an organisation looking to run a campaign to attract more women into their company? Because it's something that a lot of people do ask. They've tried different things. I don't know if it's one singular, this is what you should do and it's going to get you the outcome, but I'm curious to sort of explore this a little bit more with you, just to give people perhaps some insights if they're listening on how they could go about adapting some of your strategies.
It's a long game thing. I mean, it's just like really trying to find water in a desert sometimes, trying to find women who are skilled and trained in particular fields because of the gaps in education, as I've alluded to. So it is the long game. And you think, how do you create a pipeline as an organisation, a sustainable plan for your organisation to create a pipeline of skilled workers? How do you go about doing that? Well, you've got to first make sure your workplace is safe and isn't toxic or draining for women who are there. Otherwise, you'll spend all this money on recruiting women, but you'll fail to retain them and progress them. They'll just leave because they hate working there. So you've got to start with workplace audit. What do the cold, hard stats say about the experience of women in your workplace and you know that by asking them, and you ask them anonymously. Do women receive the same starting salary as men? Get the stats, do the work. Do they progress at equal rates through the organization? Do they get positions of responsibility and growth opportunities in your organization? Are they experiencing negative factors like hostile working culture or sexual harassment? And you've got to eliminate those things as part of this work. It's not just doing a shiny campaign and saying, come and work for us, because they'll leave if you don't have a nice place to work. Second thing is painting a picture, I suppose. You might think about someone who's done this quite effectively recently is Army and Defence. You see their ads on TV, and you'll notice they're very multicultural adverts. They're very women heavy compared to the actual workforce, and they're encouraging women to become engineers in the Army or have these technical roles. And they paint a picture of a workplace. They actually work hard to create a better workplace, and they're doing that work inside Army as well. But they're also doing the work outside to say, here's a picture of what you could be, what you could do, whether or not you're kind of person that wants to join Army or not. Those adverts are quite exhilarating. They show people traveling on ships and aeroplanes and helping people in developing countries and doing the sorts of things that people are attracted to. So that's what you've got to do. You've got to paint a picture. Why? And tell a story. Why would you want to work here? Not just because we have beanbags and, puppies are allowed, but also the important things, like what's our culture like? And why do we exist? What are we trying to achieve? And what is our mission? And how does that help humanity? You've got to really tell that story too.
No, I really love everything you're saying, and I think having a vision. I think sometimes a lot of people, they don't think like that if they are sort of in a middle management role, perhaps. One of the things that I read a report as well, and I can't remember which one it was, but there are stats around women leaving the cybersecurity industry because of how they were treated by men, and it was quite high. And so what is your sort of response on how to manage that? Because on one hand, they're saying we want more women in, but then they can't even retain the women that they've got because of how they're being treated. And, there's a range of different things as to why that they were leaving, probably pay and career progression and being patronized or whatever, or degraded or whatever it was. Like, I'm just curious on, we're saying one thing, but then we can't keep the current people that we've got. So it's sort of, it feels like it's the chicken and the egg sort of situation. Yeah,
you spot on. I mean, I've worked in workplaces that feel toxic, and a lot of women leave those workplaces because they don't feel valued and they don't feel listened to. This is a really bad thing for business if you're just looking at business, and it's a really bad thing for those people involved as well. But if you are a senior leader, you're hemorrhaging talent and money there. And there really is a big problem with leadership. If your workplace has a poor culture, firstly, you don't have control over every single person, what they think and what they do, but you do have control over your responses to that and the culture and the expectations and accountabilities that you ask your managers to sort of create in the workplace. So what are the accountabilities of your managers around retention, for example? Do you track data around who's leaving? Do you do exit interviews? Do you ask people in annual surveys how they feel about the workforce? And do you gender disaggregate the data? If you're not doing these basic things, there really is no helping you. So it really is about being a scientist, measuring stuff, keeping an eye on your workforce and seeing how they're feeling, how they're behaving, and also how you're behaving to them. Are you progressing them? Are you retaining them? Attracting people is a very important part, of creating a business. But you are completely right. If you don't retain them, the money is going, the talent is going, and it's all draining out of your company.
No, you're absolutely spot on when you say that. So just lastly, to wrap up our interview, because I've just loved everything that you're saying, and I think it's just an interview that I've wanted to do for a while, because I think it is important. People don't have the answers, and I think we're still trying to work it out. But I know that you're working on the new initiative called Future You. So I'm keen to understand like what it is and what can we sort of see come out of this initiative.
Yeah, it's a new digital awareness raising initiative. So it's a national initiative, and it was funded through the Commonwealth budget a couple of years ago. So we've got money for 3 years, but it just launched in October last year. So we've got our first results from our evaluation data. It's very exciting. What we're trying to do with this campaign is create a digital campaign that excites children aged 8 to 12 and their parents, engages them in STEM characters. These are actually animated characters, and we have 12 of them. They're from very different STEM roles. They're very diverse, different genders, and kids love them. A lot of the characters are really motivated by helping the world or changing the world in some positive way. There are animation, songs, and we've got games as well. So you can take part in different industries, from mining for precious metals to, the engineering of that, to sort of farming and using technologies to create circuits and things. So there's lots and lots of cool stuff. There's a careers quiz, and it's essentially an online platform digital campaign. Now, since October, 2.3 million kids and their parents between the ages of 8 and 12 have seen the campaign. So that's a huge number. And there's been a significant shift in the number of kids who've seen the campaign who are very interested in STEM jobs. So before they saw the campaign, only 20% of girls said they're very interested in STEM jobs. After the campaign, 68% of girls said they were very interested in STEM jobs. That's huge. That's more than 2/3 of girls. Really interested, really engaged. And amongst boys, similarly, those numbers increased, not quite as much as girls because the boys' baseline was a lot higher. So it's increasing the understanding of STEM careers amongst young people, and modern STEM careers, not just the stereotypes of like a nerd in a lab coat, or we've actually got a character who's a gamer, and she creates games for people with disabilities. And, it's really exciting. And kids are getting some great sort of recognition of these characters. And it's reducing gender stereotypes about STEM careers, and also introducing some of the a better understanding, I guess, of some of the lesser known careers. So increasing those familiarities, I guess, with different careers. So we're going on with our campaign for the next 2 years. We're creating new characters. We've got a competition for kids to draw their own character, which will be brought to life in the campaign. That is very exciting. Can't wait to see those. And we want to really reflect the jobs of the future that kids will need to have. And I'm very excited about Future You. And of course, I'm planning this careers book as well. So there'll be lots and lots coming out in the next couple of years.
No, I absolutely love that. And I think I wish when I was a kid, I had something like this implemented. So it would have probably driven me into this industry sooner, because I would have had exposure. So I really appreciate that. And for me personally, and I really love the idea of the little characters. And it sounds incredibly creative, but also paints the right picture that we're trying to tell in a way that makes sense to kids.
That's it. That's all about getting the kids in and, asking the right questions, and also changing their parents' ideas, because so often parents will encourage kids who are very academically minded into particular subjects. If your kid's doing really, really well at school, getting top grades, what do you say to them? You be a doctor or a lawyer? No, we need STEM qualified workers too. We do need doctors, we do need lawyers, but we also need a lot of other things in this country. And there are other great high paid jobs if that's what floats your boat. But otherwise, the way that kids can get engaged with these different careers and understand what they mean and understand their influence on the world, hopefully that's the hook.
No, I love that. I really love that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I really have appreciated our chat. You've shared an amazing wealth of knowledge that I was, writing down a lot of the things that you were saying, and I'm sure that our listeners are doing so as well. If people have a question for you that I did not ask you today, what would be the best way to potentially get in contact with you?
Well, I've got lots of info and contact stuff on my website, lisaharveysmith.com, and also the Women in STEM Ambassador website, womeninstem.org.au is a great place to go for that stuff. If you want to contact me, though, just tweet me, Lisa Harvey-Smith, and I'm on Instagram and, Facebook and all the old stuff too.
Really appreciate the time, Lisa. And I'd love to get you back because this has been an awesome interview.
It's been great fun. Thanks very much. And all the best to the listeners.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in to KB Cast, the cybersecurity podcast for executives. We always value your support and would love it if you could leave us a review or a comment on your platform of choice, iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And that's always appreciated. Till next time.